Right, so lately God has been giving me dreams about myself and my kids' schools and things like that, things that I can't really share, or he has not released me to share yet. So I thought I would share a dream that he's been kind of wanting me to talk about, because it's more of a national level dream, and it's very very insightful. When I looked at it this morning, I looked in my notes, I couldn't find it, and God said, you didn't write it down, remember? And then it dawned on me that I didn't write it down at that time because I understood the interpretation instantly. It didn't really need an interpretation. But the more I think about it now, the more that I have run into while studying applies to this dream. Like, it just is the dream that keeps on giving. So I am going to talk about this dream, keep an open mind about it. I'm going to back it up with things that I have learned. So I guess I'm just going to dive into the dream. The dream was that I was looking through a hospital room window and watching a nurse take care of a patient. At the same time, in the hallway, there was a TV broadcasting the news of exactly what I was seeing. The news anchors were describing the actions of the nurse 2 seconds before she carried them out. So it was like she was taking orders from them, or acting it out. So they were directing it and she was acting it out. Behind me, I heard a voice that wasn't on the screen and wasn't in the room say, pan in, because, and then I saw on the news, the camera angle panned into the patient's face because the monitor was revealing something other than what the news was describing. So it was going to blow their cover. And so they wanted to get that monitor off of the shot. And then I woke up. So interesting, right? Very interesting. This is not about doctors and nurses, by the way. Okay, so I don't want people to be offended and say I'm saying that. This is not about doctors and nurses. When I started diving into this dream more over time, I realized it was more about our media and the big pharmaceutical medical agencies. All right, so let me describe it. So I mentioned in another video about the Smith-Mundt Act. The Smith-Mundt Act was an act created during World War II. Like most of us know about Hitler's propaganda, right? Hitler used propaganda because it was a very effective tool to get people on his side, to communicate his agenda, not the truth, but his agenda. To combat Hitler's propaganda, we created in the United States the Smith-Mundt Act that made creating propaganda legal. Now, I did not know that piece until recently. I also did not know that in recent years, like within the last decade, that act has resurrected and is being used against our own people. So that's a really interesting piece that I learned. Also, I learned about the Direct-to-Consumer Act that's tied to like the FDA, but I think it's more recent. I think, and I don't know when it was signed in, but what it means is that the pharmaceutical companies, instead of advertising to the doctors and the doctors prescribing the meds to patients, they can also directly advertise to patients on media. All right, so they can directly reach them. What this means is that 70 to 75% of the advertising revenue that media gets, it comes from Big Pharma. So when you get the majority of your funds from one agency, you're going to have to make them happy or you're done, right? You can't function. When 75% of your income comes from Big Pharma, you're going to do whatever you need to do to make them happy, because you won't be able to survive without that money. So that was really interesting when I learned that as well. That makes a lot of sense. Dustin, we don't have Netflix in our home. We don't watch the news in our home. We don't do any of that. But Dustin went somewhere where in the lobby they had the TV on, and or he was in a hotel room, he said, and he was watching the game, and every commercial break had an advertisement for the Voldemort, if you know what I'm talking about. I've used that term before in the past. And I said, well, remember, 70 to 75% of their income comes from pharmaceutical companies. So that makes complete sense while we're seeing this huge push. That makes a lot of sense. Also, this dream, what I have learned is that most, or many, I should say, I don't know the number, so I can't say most, but many of the news anchors, the big news anchors that we know and have come to love, like Anderson Cooper and Lisa Ling and those people, probably Barbara Walters, I'm going to step on a limb and say that because I feel that that's probably pretty accurate, are all CIA agents. All right? That's a very interesting rabbit hole if you go down that rabbit hole. And you might be like, well, what's the problem with that? Well, if you've done your research, you'll know that most of the 3-letter and 4-letter agencies are pretty corrupt. So if you take corrupt agencies and then you put those people in the media becomes corrupt. So that is very, very interesting. There was something I was going to say about that, but I don't remember. Oh, yes. The CIA is very corrupt. JFK, I think it was the day before he was assassinated, had said that he was going to, gave a big speech, and he said he was going to splinter the CIA in 1,000 pieces or 1,000,000 pieces. I don't know how many pieces, but lots of pieces. And that essentially got him assassinated, is what people believe, was that speech. So they are very, very corrupt, and they have infiltrated other places, such as the media. So that is very interesting. And what we don't realize is that our media is, we think we have choice when it comes to our media, but we don't. 90%, I'm going to guess that 90% of all the media that we have, the social media, Disney and Netflix, all the mainstream medias, all of that are owned basically by 6 people. So if you follow the money, you will find 6 people control all of that, all of those media types. So it gives us an illusion of choice, but we really don't, because those 6 people are very like-minded. They have the same goals and same agenda. So when you hear the same message on all the local stations and then the big stations, you know that one person is giving direction of what needs to be said. And we think that, oh, it's being said multiple times, it must be true, but that's the trick of propaganda. In fact, it's just one person pulling the puppet strings, and we're buying into that. So just be very aware when you hear the same thing over and over and over again, that you might be sucked into the illusion that it is the truth when it's just coming from one person's mouth. So that's very interesting. Also in this dream, recently, I'd say in the last 6 weeks, I saw this clip of this doctor who was a doctor of pediatrics at a hospital, supposedly, and she was talking about how she has seen so many children die of the coronavirus. And I was like, that's interesting, because that doesn't go with the numbers that I've seen on the CDC and other places, is that the flu kills way more kids, and most of the kids that have died because of other issues, like battling leukemia and other things. And so I was like, oh, that just seems odd. Anyway, she gets choked up, and you can't tell whether she's crying and she walks off and says, I can't do this because she's so emotionally overwhelmed, or if she's laughing and she says she can't do this and walks off because it's a scam. I watched that clip over and over again. I'm like, oh, I could argue either way. Like, I don't really know. I could argue either way. But if you take her name and you look up all her social media, you can tell that it was created the day before the clip was released. And so that tells us that she's probably not a real doctor, that she has no other... everything about her on the internet had just been created that day or the day before, and she doesn't have a historical lineage of information on the internet. Then you're going to have to guess that she's probably a fake doctor. So we have to be very careful when we see these things to really dig in and just look, okay, let me just test it really quickly to see if she's even real. You know, she couldn't be, and that tactic is used quite a bit. Another thing we need to consider, and I knew this before the dream, was that the NIH, the CDC, and Gavi are all interconnected. So we have all these medical agencies that we are supposed to trust, but they're all integrated. If you look at their boards and the heads of the agencies and the people that have their hands in the agencies, you'll see a lot of repeating faces from one agency to the next. They sit on the board of one agency, but also are the head of another agency. So again, we have this illusion of choice, but really they're all one agency. They're all tied together. They're all in bed with each other, figuratively and literally. And I say that because, you know, Fauci is a big part of the CDC. He makes all these recommendations for the CDC and for our nation. But his wife is the head of ethics at the NIH. So and rarely do they contradict each other. And you'll see that a lot of these people have the same goals or say the same things. And it just makes us think that they're separate agencies when they're really not. They're all tied together. So I think we have to be very, very careful when viewing these agencies, that they're not really all in the up and up. And even, hesitant to say this. So a lot of you don't realize this, but I was offered a job a few months ago at a hospital as one of their head researchers. And God made it very clear at the very end to not take the job. He said, abort deceptiveness. Deceptive. So I was like, oh. So I turned down the job. And there was lots of reasons why he was saying that now that I look at it. And one of the things is that research can be very deceptive. Very deceptive. And the way we do research can be very, very deceptive. And again, if you look at our research agencies and who allows research to come to light and to surface, and what research is squashed, a lot of who makes that call is, guess what, Big Pharma. And if you look at research and it doesn't sit quite right, follow the money. Who are these researchers, and are they funded by Big Pharma, who has an agenda one way or another of what this research piece says? So you have to really dive deep into that, because that happens quite a bit too, that these researchers are funded by somebody who has a motive. They want a specific outcome with that research. So this dream, I'm telling you, this dream just keeps on giving. And like I said, it is not about doctors and nurses. I know a lot of doctors and nurses. I have lots of nurses in my family that I truly respect and I go to often for advice and for their opinion. This is not about doctors and nurses. This dream is solely about the media and about the medical agencies. So pray about this dream. See if God wants you to go down that rabbit hole of researching these things that I've talked about. It is quite the rabbit hole. It just keeps going, just like this dream keeps going. So it's very interesting. And I'm sure in 6 months when I look back on this dream, I will be like, wow, that dream was even more insightful than I thought. Because now that I'm unpacking it with you guys, months after I've had the dream, I'm realizing how much I've learned in that time that is backed up by that dream. And that's what's so interesting about dreams, is that they can have so much depth to them that you don't realize it. And once you start researching, God is telling you so much about the world that we live in that you just don't realize until He makes you research it and He makes you dive in. So I'm happy studying if that's what you are called to do. If not, and if so, go in His shalom.